Robert Brus is the host of the Go All In podcast movement, a startup entrepreneur who has appeared on the Brian Rose London Real Show, creator of Fly Anywhere, a helicopter share ride for executives and individuals, a military guy who joined both the Australian Army and Royal Navy. I'm Mitchell Chadrow. This is the Mitchell Chadrow Show. So if you are ready to listen up, here is today's story on this Listen Up Show 080. Robert, tell me a little bit about how you actually met Brian Rose from London Real.
It's a funny story. I've had a digital marketing agency for a very long time, or it feels like a long time, because 1 year in digital in the digital ecosphere seems like 5 years because it changes so rapidly. And my partner Sue said to me, "Hey Rob, you should do this course." And I said, "What course is that, Darren? What are you talking about?" And she said to me, he has this really good podcasting course, because I've been watching Brian Rose for a little while, been seeing a whole lot of his stuff. I'd never really been inside of his ecosystem or anything like that. And that's how I met Brian Rose. I went and did his podcasting course, learned how to do that, and went to London for a graduation on completion of the course, and got lucky enough to sit down and sit in the hot seat with him for about 15 or 20 minutes. It was kind of cool.
Now, when you were 17 years old, you actually joined the Royal Australian Navy as a combat systems operator. Can you tell me a little bit about your experience there and how it's been able to help you in business?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. As your American listeners might know, so combat systems operator in the American Navy is known as an operator specialist. And for me, as an OS or a CSO, it's kind of like the job itself entails playing an old school video game. Think of Hunt for Red October type Navy. That's the Navy that I was in, on guided missile frigates like that. It's very, very different these days, of course. But it positioned me in a way where I had to get really, really good at doing the same thing over and over. It's a very repetitive job. It's sometimes a little bit boring and mundane, but it does require a fine eye for detail, and to be able to, you've got to really know your stuff, because when it's happening in real time, there's no time to consult with somebody else that's in charge or somebody else with more experience. You really have to make the decisions about what it is that you're seeing and what's happening to you right on the front end of it, particularly with electronic warfare. And for the people listening that don't know what EW is, on a warship, the first sniff you get of a bad guy out there is their radar signature. And every radar signature has an individual fingerprint, and you have to run that through the computers, and you have to make assessments and use deductions and the powers of deduction to see whether or not they're actually going to be harming us, or they're doing something that's surveillance on us. You have to make decisions about those things, and you bring those decisions and you put it into the whole tactical picture, and then the boss makes decisions about those sorts of things, and that's how you kind of fight the warship. And I was lucky enough back in the day, and when I was there, I used to be a radar operator, sonar operator, and electronic warfare analysis as well. So I got to experience all three bits and pieces of the role. I'm pretty sure in the American Navy you only do one or the other. You're either above water warfare or below water warfare type stuff. So I was lucky enough to get all three of them. And then later on in life, that taught me great attention to detail, and it taught me, definitely set the foundations of teamwork. You can't operate in a warship type environment in an operations room as an individual. Everybody is an important member of the team, and no one's more important than anybody else. And that really set me in good stead for my business and for all the things that I did later on in my life.
Well, we're going to certainly talk to you about your current business, which is Go All In podcast movement. But I see here that as a startup entrepreneur, you actually had a few other businesses. Can you tell us a little bit about your Fly Anywhere business as well as your SEO Works businesses that you started before becoming a podcaster?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've had, as an entrepreneur, I've always wanted to have my own business, and I think it's not so much about what I did, but more about the freedom that it gives me, which is what I wanted. And when I first left the military, I actually had an electrical contracting company with two of my mates that I got out with, and there was three of us, and it was within about 3 months we had about 30 staff that were working for us. So our business exploded. It was doing really, really well. And yeah, that was my sort of first venture into business and my first experience with business. SEO Works, to your exact question there, SEO Works is a digital marketing agency that I run with my brother, and we've had that in a couple of different forms for the last 10 or so years, a little bit longer. I kind of got into digital way back in the electrical contracting days when I had to build a website, and it was way back in the early 2000s before things like WordPress or, the really simple content management systems existed. And building a website required a university degree. Building a thing in flat HTML was something that was quite specialized and a bit of a black art way back when. And that was kind of my first introduction to it. And over a period of time, I kind of learnt to do those things and just tinkered with that sort of stuff. It was never a huge interest, but it was always something that was very expensive in business. And I kind of learnt how to do those things and self-taught, just trial and error. It was never under sort of any duress. And over time, people started asking me, "Hey, Rob, can you help me do that? Can you help me build that? Can you make this happen for me?" And it was around 2007. Don't quote me on the year. From memory, it was about then that the iPhone came out and apps started to become a real thing. And we built a whole series of apps in and around that when that first happened here in Australia, and that was kind of cool. I sort of think if anything, as an entrepreneur, I should have stuck with things a little bit longer, and that was good. All service-based style businesses that I've had, and the Fly Anywhere business was a company that I started in the days before Uber, and it's all about sharing a seat in an aeroplane and sharing the cost of that. In Australia, there's more than 1,861 airports, but of which there's only about 225 of them that are actually utilised. There's a whole lot of underutilized infrastructure throughout Australia, and there's a whole boatload of airplanes and a whole heap of pilots, and there's a whole lot of people that want to move around, but there was nothing that ever kind of joined the dots and brought them all together. And the Fly Anywhere business was the business that was going to solve that problem. And unfortunately, that's one of the failures that I've had in my entrepreneurial career. The idea was good, the idea is sound, the platform was good, everything was really good, but I was just before my time. Trying to explain something like that and drawing an analogy to Uber or Lyft or a rideshare type business is pretty easy these days because people understand that. But way back when, 5 or 6 years ago, whenever it was, that was a very, very difficult thing to try and understand and trying to articulate. And to an industry that had no real concept of how digital marketing could help them, and they had no real concept of marketing, period, it was a very, very hard sell. And just one of those businesses that kind of died on the vine. I got some good PR on the front end, and it's one of those things. And I remember in the first week here in Sydney in Australia where I lived, there was 23 helicopter operators. And I can remember at the time I launched the business. I got a bit of PR. I was in the newspaper. I was on the radio a couple of times. And I think I must have had about 15 leads in the first week of people wanting to go on a helicopter joy flight over Sydney Harbour. Who wouldn't want to do that, right? If you're here in Sydney on a holiday, what a beautiful way to go and see the harbour from the air. And I had all of these folks on my speed dial to send them all a text message, and no one would buy the lead. No one would purchase it. They were all like, "Yeah, just send it over to me, Rob. We'll take them flying." But it's like, no, I want to sell the lead to you. I'm trying to create a business here. And I explained everything to them. I'd visited with these people, and it was just one of those businesses that died on the vine. It just never worked because I put it down to being ahead of my time, and also to those aviation businesses just being used to having people walk in off the street or ring them up out of the old-fashioned yellow pages looking for business, and they weren't ready to do the IT thing. And even nowadays, 5, 6 years on, I still have had a couple of ventures in the aviation space, and they haven't worked because just such an old-fashioned industry and an old-fashioned way of doing business.
It's interesting today. A lot of talking heads will talk about business failures or being stuck and what to do when you find yourself in a particular situation like that. So how does Robert Brus know when to sort of cut your losses, cut your failures, and sort of move on? And when do you know that you should continue to persist and, continue to work on the execution of a good idea?
Yeah, it's a really, really great question, and it was one that I struggled for a long time with Fly Anywhere, because I had this thing that was so unbelievably clever that had never been introduced to an industry before. And remember, it was before ride sharing even existed. And just maybe to give you a little bit of context about that and give you the backstory to answer your question, is that as a commercial operator, there's a whole lot of rules and regulations around what you can and can't do. And in Australia, there's a lot of red tape about taking passengers flying from point A to point B, and rightly so. The industry needs to be regulated and heavily regulated for the safety of the general public. But you can still fly from point A to point B as a private pilot and take somebody with you. What you're not allowed to do is to advertise the fact that you're going to that place, but the individual is allowed to say, hey, I'm interested in going to point B. Is there anyone going to point B? Yeah, as a matter of fact, I'm going to point B. You want to jump in with me? Yeah, sure. And you can jump in the aeroplane with me, the little aeroplane that is, little single-engine bug smasher type thing. And so long as the passenger doesn't pay any more money than what the pilot does, you share the cost. So if the price was $100, the pilot would pay $60 and the passenger would pay $40, you'd share the cost and you're good to go. Pilot gets hours, because that's usually what they're trying to do, to build their hours, and the passenger gets to go to point B, which is where they're wanting to go. And that was extremely well received. It was inside the boundaries of what you can and can't do, inside the legal requirements. I had approval from the government to say, yes, you're doing the right thing. No, you're not going to get in trouble if you do that. Just make sure you tick all the boxes from a legal perspective. So I had really great support from the people that kind of regulated the industry. And then I got some really great media, and the media was really excited by it. I was written up in a couple of magazine articles, and I was in the newspaper, on the radio, and all sorts of things. And back in the day before social media was like it is today. So that was kind of a cool thing. And so I thought that I had this really, really good opportunity and this great idea. So I persevered and I just did what I had to do. But you know what? At every single turn, when I had these people coming to my website saying, yes, Rob, I want to learn how to fly, or I want to go from point A to point B, or I want to hire an airplane and a pilot to go to this place, and I want to do all that, I was generating the interest. People were finding my website, and it was just happening organically. It was really amazing. And then on the other side of that, I would say to people, to the business owners, hey, I've got all of this stuff going on here. Do you want a piece of this action? And, we would sell the leads for $19. It was cheap because we didn't really know what to sell them for, so we went in really cheap. Somebody who wants to learn how to fly, that's going to cost you here in Australia, back in the day, upwards of sort of 70 or 80,000 Australian dollars. And, hey, this person wants to learn to fly. They want to come out on the weekend to go for their first flight. Can you hook them up? Yeah, sure I can. Pass me their details. No, come to the website and buy it for $20. And people would just go, no, we're not buying it. We're not doing it. Bad luck. And they just flat out refused. And I think it was after about maybe the 100th time that had happened that I started to realize that the folks in the aviation industry, and again, it's not a reflection on them. They don't know what they don't know, but they just didn't get it. They didn't get the fact that there was literally thousands of consumers, micro, macro, over a period of time. My website would have acquired thousands of consumers that wanted to go from point A to point B and to do all of these things and to utilize their services, but they weren't willing to capitalize on what that opportunity was because they'd never done that before. And so I kind of deduced after about, I must have been probably 6 months of really trying very, very hard, putting my heart and soul into the business. You put your own coin into it as well. You're building a website and you're doing all of these sorts of things, and you're marketing and you're visiting and you're trying to do media and all that stuff. And I just didn't get there. So I kind of didn't quit. I let it be for a little while. And then I remember Uber coming out, and I remember similar sorts of things happening in the United States, and then looking across the pond and wondering if it was working over there, and it wasn't really working there. And then the regulators squashed it over there. And it was a painful and slow death. It was a death by 1,000 cuts. But eventually, you got to cut the thing loose, and, I can't spend any more time on this. I've just got to move on. As good as the idea was, I was trying to be a bit of a white knight to an industry that didn't need a white knight, and the industry didn't want a white knight. And
well, you mentioned move on, and one of the reasons why you're on the Listen Up podcast is because as a business owner, as a business leader, your story really can inspire others. So really that kind of takes me to today, and I know that people in the audience are going to certainly want to go over to golan.com.au because, as we can hear from your accent, you're actually in Australia right now. So you're at 10 o'clock at night, and I'm here at 8 o'clock in the morning. So we're really thankful that you came on at this hour. You have the Go All In podcast movement, and maybe you could tell everybody what that is and the interesting way that you get others to help you with your own distribution channel to sort of bring more people to your site.
Yeah, it's a really great question, and thanks for that one, and thanks for the opportunity to appear on the show and also to share a little bit of my story and tell the audience about my podcast as well. It's a funny thing. If you've ever tried to write a book, I sat down to try and write a book and then realized that 150 pages in, I didn't want to write a book. What I wanted to do was to share my opinions, and there's no better way to do that than to do that on a podcast. And, I figured if I could tell other people's stories of commitment and success, because I knew how hard commitment and success had been in my entrepreneurial journey. And I do know that just from my peers, the other folks that are around me that are business owners, how difficult it's been for them. Everyone's got a really good story, and you can draw inspiration from it. And at first, I didn't really feel like I had very much to say, but over a period of time, I started to realize that it was a pretty important message, that message of doing whatever it takes to succeed and to go all in and to commit to something is a really important aspect of the human experience. And what I realized was, I never coined the term, let's just be clear about that first. I never coined that phrase, go all in. That's been around forever. It's just something that I used in marketing and something that's really easy to relate to because each and every one of us has said that at some point. But, once you start a podcast, you've got to get out there and you've got to market the thing, because you're amongst 600,000 or 700,000 other podcasts. And what I did is I went on other people's shows and I shared my story, my entrepreneurial journey about success, about failure, about doing whatever it takes to succeed and making it happen. And as I would go on shows just like your one here, I would scoop up some of that audience and bring it on back to mine. And I grew my audience really, really big, really quickly. And there's been a whole lot of people over the last year or so asking me, hey, Rob, can you help me get on some other shows? And I was kind of like, no, you do it yourself. You can do it. It's easy. Just reach out and ask. And, not realizing that it's actually a really big hustle to do that. For every 50 people you reach out to in the podcasting world, you only get one response because there's a long line of people wanting to go on everybody's podcasts. And, when you're soliciting other shows, it can be quite difficult to do that. So I figured that one thing, this is a business that I've got now, a podcast booking agency, because over a period of time, after about 30 or 40 people asking me, I finally capitulated and decided to help other people to do it. But over a period of time in doing that business and helping other people get booked on other people's podcasts, I realized that all the power was with the podcasters. And that's not a bad thing because I'm a podcaster and so are you. So I like being able to decide who comes on my show. But the conundrum that people face, and podcasters particularly face, is they have these amazing shows. They have this amazing, incredible passion for what it is that they do. But the problem is that they have to give all of their time for it. They have to pay for the production of it. And then they're promoting somebody else's business or brand, and they're paying to entertain everybody else. And I thought, well, what if I could create a way where I could share a bit of that revenue? So people are coming to me and saying to me, hey, Rob, can you get me booked on a show? And I'd say, yeah, absolutely. And then I would go out to the podcasters and say to them, hey, without selling your soul to an advertiser or without promoting some affiliate deal that doesn't align with your values or what it is that you want to do, I'll pay you to come on over and interview the guests that I've got available because they're wanting to be on a show, they're looking for some PR, and you should be rewarded for that. So we have a nice little rev share model that podcasters that register at my website, it's completely free for them. They come on over to my site, they register, they search the database of guests that we've got, which is kind of up and down, it comes and goes type thing. Sometimes there's a whole boatload of people there, sometimes there's not many people there, it just depends on their availability. And folks come on over, they book them, they get the PR, podcaster gets paid a couple of bucks to cover their costs, and suddenly they're not out there paying to entertain everybody else who are actually getting paid to do it, which is kind of nice. And that's it's a bit of a revolution in the industry because there's no real way for podcasters to get paid other than with advertising, affiliate deals, or monetizing the relationships that they have with their guests. And all of those things are really great things. But getting paid to interview people, I think, is where most people want to get to. And that's a nice place to be when you've got lots and lots of guests, and you've got a great podcast.
You mentioned hustle. We hear a lot of talk about side hustles, and so a lot of our entrepreneurs in the audience are soon to be entrepreneurs, but they don't want to go all in. They want to still continue to have that mainstream job where they're going into an office, but yet they want to sort of start something up on the side, i.e. a side hustle. And when I saw this idea that you had to sort of get others involved, I thought, gee, this is another side hustle for others out there. And so I thought that was very creative in terms of actively getting other people involved in the Go All In podcast movement that you have here in Australia.
Yeah, it's a beautiful description what you've got there, and I would add to that by saying these two really important points. And as I kind of mentioned earlier, that I've had a digital marketing agency for a long time now, and over the last 12 to 18 months, I've seen the industry change just radically. Everybody experiences it. We all have social media. We're all online, and we all see the latest and greatest fad coming through. And what I realized over the last 12 to 18 months is that there's only two things that you, as a business owner, an entrepreneur, or somebody that has a side hustle or is thinking about having a side hustle, can control. There's only two things you can control. One is your email list, because that can never, ever be censored. No one can ever censor your email list, because you can write whatever the hell you want in your email list and nobody can say otherwise. And, whether people connect with it or they don't really is up to them. Whether they stay subscribed or they unsubscribe, that's up to them. But the point is, you can say whatever you like and you can communicate whatever message you want in your email list. The other thing that you can control is your podcast, meaning a podcast you own, or your appearance on somebody else's podcast, because that is very, very, very rarely censored. Because if you get invited to go on somebody else's podcast, they're not going to censor you because you've just been invited on there. They may edit you, however, they very, very rarely, in my experience, will censor you, or they won't cut something out that they don't like. They'll just leave it in there because that's the opinion of the guest and how it is. Every other bit of advertising and marketing that's out there, it's available there to consumers or to business owners, entrepreneurs, or people thinking about a side hustle, is controlled by an algorithm. And if you think about what an algorithm is, it's a piece of code owned by a giant company whose sole purpose for existence is your money. They don't really care about whether or not you reach your target market, or your audience is right, or your targeting is right, or what they care about is you funding the account and somebody clicking on their ads so they get paid. And it's every second day you hear about the latest Instagram algorithm update or the latest Google algorithm update, but who really knows what that actually means? The only people that really know what that means are the people behind writing the algorithms, and they're the data scientists that works for those giant monolithic companies. And really, do they care about you reaching your target audience, or you reaching your target market? And what I say is, if you want to control your message, if you want to control your brand, and you want to control how you're perceived to an audience, you need to communicate that. And there's no better way to communicate that than sitting down with a podcast host for an hour or two and talking about your business, your brand, and what it is that you actually know. And likewise with your email. You've got the latitude and the freedom to do the same thing there in your email, to have a conversation, to serialize things, or just to broadcast a message to an audience. So, what I would say to anybody that's thinking about a side hustle is definitely concentrate on building your email list. It's the one thing that everybody still says the money's in the list, and I've got to agree. The money still is in the list despite all of the other distractions that we have. Email is still an extremely effective tool, and it's very, very effective because it can't be censored. That's part of the reason. And the other thing is, if you're thinking about that side hustle, make sure you think about how you can get on some podcasts and how you can communicate your message through that actual form of media.
As far as, a lot of people talk about balance, how you balance everything, and how you sort of keep up your energy level and your stamina. When people look at you, I know I watched a few of your YouTube videos, and obviously you're someone who has obviously high energy. And so how do you stay grounded? How do you sort of come up with your ideas? How are you so creative? what other things do you draw on other than just merely the business help you stay focused on the main task at hand?
Yeah, really great question. And, you know, if you watch a video of me on YouTube or my channel or my face, or wherever we've seen videos of me, what you'll see is you'll see a person, me, doing what it is that they absolutely love to do. And I wish I'd discovered this kind of form of communication, meaning podcasting, earlier on in my life, because I just love to have conversations with people. So when you watch a video of me online doing that, you'll see somebody who's really enthusiastic and somebody who seems to really enjoy what they do. And that is genuine, and it's from the heart. And, you know, to answer your question, what is it that keeps me motivated? The first thing is I absolutely love what I get to do. I really enjoy podcasting, because there's nothing more that I like than sitting down with somebody and just having a conversation. And, you know, when you get on somebody else's podcast or you bring them onto your show, you go deep, and you go deep straight away, and it's like real meaningful conversation. They're not superficial conversations that you have with a colleague at work and, you know, talking about the weather or what you did on the weekend or something like that. You talk about really deep and meaningful topics, and I love to do that. And I love to be a fly on the wall and listen to that in other podcasts as well, because that's what it feels like. It's really cool. But, you know, to keep myself sharp and focused and keep on bringing my A game on a daily basis, there's a couple of things that I really concentrate on, and one is sleep. Believe it or not, I've been terrible with it over the last couple of years. And in a recent podcast that I did with a guy named Brian Kane, he talked about the importance of sleep, and I kind of just paid a bit of lip service to it. But then one night I'd finished all the work that I needed to do, and I got to bed a little bit earlier, and I had an hour's more sleep. And I've discovered that if I go to bed at the same time every night, like before 10 p.m., I'm up at 5 o'clock, and I'm awake. I only need 7 hours sleep. That's kind of enough for me. But previously I was sort of really erratic. I'd go to bed at 1 o'clock and I'd get up at 5 o'clock and I'd go to the gym and train, and, you know, I was all over the shop. And then, you know, the next day I'd be tired, so I'd be in bed by 9 o'clock, and then I'd be awake at 4 o'clock because I can't sleep anymore. And my sleeping pattern was terrible. But now I've got myself into a groove. It's been about 4 weeks now since I've been doing that. I've discovered that that's really helped a whole lot for me. And I just paid lip service to it for far too long, and that's helped me a whole lot. And the other thing that I do that keeps me sharp and focused every day is exercise. It's absolutely not negotiable. As an ex-military guy, I spend a lot of time training and exercising. And when you're in the military, for the people listening that are or have been, they would know that the first thing you do at the start of your day is some physical training. And that's still how I've started my day every day, pretty much since I left the military. And I love it. You know, I'm not really ever training for anything specifically. Sometimes I am. I live right by the beach in a beautiful place here in Australia, in Sydney, called Cronulla. I'm looking out at the ocean right now at night time. It's about less than 100 meters away from where I'm standing, and out there all the time on my stand-up paddleboard swimming, and likewise just down in the local gym as well. So they're the sleep, passion, and exercise are the things that keep me going every day.
Well, you know, it's really interesting. My dad was a military guy as well, and he was in the Navy here in the U.S., but you were also in the Army as well. To be in more than one branch, just a very big influence, I'm sure, on everything that you do every day.
Yeah, no question. It's I was really fortunate in my military career. I got to go to some incredible places, have some incredible friends who I'm still really pretty close with these days as well, as we all get a little bit older and slower, and there's still a war story to tell here and there. You know, they've got the stories. I don't really have many stories, but I was really fortunate. The very last posting that I had in the Australian Defence Force was, while I was in the Army, was at the Australian Army Parachute School. So I was lucky enough to get all my military freefall qualifications and a whole raft of static line parachuting under my belt as well. So that kind of really taught me self-reliance. You know, I thought I was self-reliant as an adult.
What's the analogy of jumping out of planes you have to go through when you start up a new business or when you try to come up with a new idea that you have to obviously execute on and decide whether to stick with it or to sort of move on as you did with Fly Anywhere?
Someone asked me that exact question the other day. It wasn't on a podcast, though. They asked me the question, and The answer is that starting a new business is actually more scary, because when you go parachuting, your equipment doesn't fail, despite the fact that it's very scary, and anyone that tells you that they're not scared when they're jumping out of an airplane is lying to you. You get conditioned to it, but you still have trepidation, fear, anxiety, especially if you're doing it at nighttime, at altitude and things like that as well. It's scary. And fear is relative. You know, you'll feel anxiety and trepidation about starting a business, about, you know, picking up the phone and making a cold call, trying to find new business. You'll be worried about when your cash flow is not right and how you're going to pay your bills and how you're going to pay the office rent. That fear is just as real as what it's like standing on the edge of a ramp of a cargo plane about to jump out into the night. That's just, the fear feels exactly the same, believe me. But, you know, it's about leaning into it, and it's about having a little bit of trust, and also, I think, having a little bit of faith. And I'm a big believer of everything happening twice. And visualization's been a huge thing for me in my entrepreneurial journey, and likewise in not so much in my military journey, but in my kind of physical training journey outside of the military is, and what I mean by that, everything happening twice, you would have heard before, athletes go through a process of visualization before they do something. You know, you might have seen it before where a football player puts the ball down on the kicking tee and they go through some really weird routine to line up the ball, and they're sideways to it. They look at the goalpost where the ball's about to go. They kick the ball and boom, it goes straight through a dead center. It's like, man, how does he keep doing that? You know, because they're going through that process of visualization. You know, they put the ball in the tee there, and in their mind's eye, they can see exactly where that ball's going, where they're going to hit it. And they get really, really good at doing that with practice and repetition. And I think business is just like that. You know, you can learn to do anything. You can learn how to be good at anything. And practice and repetition is the key. And visualization is the thing that helps you with that practice and repetition. And everything can happen twice. Your brain can't tell the difference to whether or not it's happened in real life or it's happened in your mind's eye. So get it to go and happen in your mind's eye many, many times before it happens in real life.
You know, you mentioned trust, and in business, that's really big. How do you define trust, and how do you trust smarter in business?
Oh, gosh, that's a really, really poignant question for me, actually. In the last year, I've had a bit of a journey. I've been on a shiny new object journey. I've been on a path, but then a shiny new object came up, and I followed that, and it didn't go so well for me. Another kind of failure, and this time the failure wasn't so much of the business, but the failure was of me personally, and I made the mistake of not trusting myself. You know, I believe that we're not only thinking creatures here on this planet as human beings, but we're feeling, and thinking together forms the process of a decision. And ultimately, trust is just a decision. You know, am I going to trust this person? Do I trust myself for this? And what I discovered is I listen to my head too much. I over-rationalize things. I overthink things too much. Sometimes I over-analyze things too much. It's a little bit of a shortcoming. And over the last year, I really identified that as a problem that kept on creeping up and helping me to make mistakes and making there's a difference between making a mistake and making an error. And when you make an error, you do something that you didn't expect, or something went wrong and you weren't ready for it. But when you make a mistake, you know better. And I'd made several mistakes in the last year using poor judgment, and my gut told me otherwise. And every time my head was wrong, I went back and went, see, your gut was right. Your gut was right. Your gut told you that that's what it should have been. And I really believe that gut instinct that we all have, that feeling that we all have, should be combined with what you're thinking and what you're rationalizing in your mind. And I think you need to visualize those things and extrapolate those things in your mind's eye to as far as they can go to work out if that trust is actually going to play out for you, if that decision is going to work for you or not. So it's a feeling and a thinking thing combined, but trust your gut. Your intuition's always right, is what I say.
And so I think what would be most helpful to our audience is in telling us a little bit about what that failure was, what was the trust issue, and how you relate it back to your business to sort of help you and catapult you to where you are now and into the future. I don't think that you could separate out personal from business. I think it's all one. You know, you hear people say the saying, "Oh, it's only business," Well, no, it's really personal. And so it's very difficult to sort of separate out the two because they are intertwined. So if you could tell us as much as you can about what happened and how you're now using that in your current business and how you'll implement that in going forward so that you don't continue to make the same trust mistakes in the future.
I think your audience will like it. I can laugh about it now and giggle about it now because it's a bit funny in retrospect and looking back. But over the last year, it wasn't very funny, believe me. And the reason I'm kind of giggling a bit is what had happened is I was just scrolling through my Facebook feed like you do mindlessly one morning, and I was sitting down on the step as I do on usually most mornings and having a cup of coffee by the ocean before I get started with my day. And I saw a meme on in my Facebook feed, and it said, "Stop giving people so much latitude. They know exactly what they're doing." And there was a picture that accompanied it that kind of amplified that message. And I realized then and there that I'd made that mistake, and people that I trusted knew exactly what they were doing, and what they did is they took advantage of me. And I knew that they were taking advantage of me, and I could feel it, and that was the feeling that I had was, these guys are having a lend at me. Really? You want me to do that? You want me to do... And I really felt like I was being taken advantage of. But in my mind, I over-rationalized that and went, no, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. And my brother said to me, he goes, "You're like a battered wife, Rob. If you've ever known a woman, you know, maybe not to use this as a bad example, but if you've ever known a woman that's been in a domestic violence circumstance and she's been hit, she'll often say that, hey, he didn't mean to hurt me. He didn't mean to do that. He said he's sorry. He said he's never going to do that again." And my brother said to me, "Rob, you're like a battered wife." And I kind of dismissed it all like the battered wife does. And over a period of time, I realized he was 100% right. And every time something didn't go quite right, all the power came back to me, and I was suddenly in charge. And then a carrot was dangled in front of me for something new, something exciting, something, some financial gain that I was about to get, or some experience that I was going to have. That was all dangled in front of me, and that was happening. And then suddenly it just comes back around again, full circle, and someone takes advantage of me again, and I don't get paid, the invoice is not fulfilled, something goes wrong, and it's like, these people are just having a lend at me again. And I'd blow up about it, and we just went around and around in this vicious cycle.
What does success look like to you? I mean, what's your vision of success?
This is my favorite podcasting question of all time, and I ask it of all of my guests on my podcast as well. And for me, that's changed radically in the last sort of 9 months or so. The last 6 to 9 months, it's changed. Once upon a time, as an entrepreneur, like all entrepreneurs, it's about the money, and it's about freedom. And it's never really been so much about the money. It's more about the freedom. But in order to get that freedom and do what you want and come and go as you please and eat what you want and go where you want and travel where you want, that has to be about money. And I realized that over the last 6 to 9 months with the podcasting booking agency that's been ticking along really nicely, I've had the opportunity to help a whole lot of people. And when I look at that at its entirety and enjoying the process of podcasting myself and sharing and amplifying these other people's messages, my definition of success has changed, and it comes down now to how many people I can communicate the message to, meaning the go all in message, and how many people I can help. So the more people I can help and the more people I can help amplify their message, the more successful I'll become. And that's where I realized what all this podcasting thing was all about. Suddenly it kind of occurred to me, I had this epiphany, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's such a cool thing, and it feels so damn good. And I think that's reflected in the videos that you might see of me online with my enthusiasm and my love of what it is that I do, because I really, really love to help people. And the more people I can help amplify their message, the more successful I'll become. And you know what? As soon as I started not focusing on how much money I was making and cash flow and the financial side of it, and started focusing on amplifying other people's messages, the money showed up. And my definition of success is now not so much about a financial gain. That's very, very important, don't get me wrong. And that is still, I've got one eye on that target every day of the week and every hour of the day, don't get me wrong. But that's purely driven by my ability to help other people amplify their message. Because in doing that, they help me along my journey. I help them. And only good things can happen when you have a win-win like that.
You mentioned an epiphany. So what was going on in your life that helped create that aha moment, that the switch went on in your mind to have that thought pop into your head, and it now all made a little bit more sense in terms of what success truly was to you?
Well, the first epiphany was that silly meme that was in Facebook where, you know, people stopped giving them so much credit, they know exactly what they're doing. And the first epiphany was, yeah, they're taking advantage of me. And then my brother telling me that I was the battered wife and, you know, you're suffering, Rob, you need to do something about that and you need to sort that out. And those things, those couple of things there together combined like that made me realize, that forced me into a decision-making matrix and to work out what it is that I was going to do and how to do that. And you know, I don't think there was a particular epiphany about the actual podcast itself, but it was more about where my life was in relation to where I thought it was going. And it was just nowhere near where I thought it was going to be with the shiny new object that I was chasing after. It was, I know it's a bit of an abstract conversation, but I don't want to put it out there in a public forum about what it was or who those people were, you know, because, you know, there's always legal ramifications around those sorts of things. So that's the reason I'm a bit cagey about saying exactly what it was. But I certainly, you know, it doesn't really matter what it was, because it was just a business that was not playing out nicely or well, because I was being taken advantage of quite considerably. And the epiphany there was, as I mentioned, my brother telling me that, you know, I was like the battered wife and the silly meme on Facebook. But from the podcasting perspective, you know, I knew that was going to be something that was going to be with me for a long time. You know, there's many years left in me for podcasting. And then realizing, I guess, you know, when you ask that question, when I think about it now, realizing that podcasters don't get paid to do what they love to do, which is to interview other people. That was an epiphany. And realizing that there's thousands of people out there that want to appear on podcasts. There's thousands of podcasters out there that want to get paid to do what it is that they love, which is have conversations with other people. And I thought, you know what, I've got the capacity, I've got the skill set, I've got the team to create a marketplace to do that. That was definitely an epiphany. And then in realizing all of that, you know, it's not just one thing, of course, but then I realized that my definition of success was changing. It wasn't about money, and it wasn't about, you know, the cash flow. It now became about how many people I can help and how many people I can help amplify their message. But it didn't really happen as like a one big wham sort of thing. It's a process of little things that are happening like that to form the epiphany, if you like.
We certainly appreciate you coming on the Listen Up show and having us get to know you a lot more. We're really looking forward to hearing your continued story. Certainly would like to have you come back, and maybe we can get into some of the nuts and bolts of some of the businesses and the processes that you use to sort of make it a success. In parting words, anything that you'd like to say to the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much, Mitchell, for the opportunity to come on and to share my message with the audience. Well, you know, you're talking to the Go All In guy, so what I would say is that, you know, whatever you're doing, whatever you're working on, get busy and get to it and go all in. That's what I would say. That's kind of how I end my podcast. But the reason that I say go all in, and the reason that I love it so much, and I think the reason why your audience already knows what it means, is because it's about potential. You have the potential to be and to do and to have whatever you want in this world. And when you decide to commit and you decide that you're going to go all in on something, you bring that potential from its future tense into the present. And when you bring your potential into the present, what you're doing is you're giving your very best to the world. And when you give your very best to the world, I think you make the world a little bit better. Just one person and one decision and one go-all-in moment at a time.
Robert Brus, we want to thank you again for coming on the show. Thank you again, and we wish you the best. Please stay in touch.
Thanks, Mitchell. See you, mate.
Okay, we will be back soon with more business content and entrepreneurial stories. I am Mitchell Chadrow, and this is The Mitchell Chadrow Show. The Mitchell Chadrow Show is produced by Mitchell Chadrow. The Mitchell Chadrow Show is a Virtual Cash Incorporated production. Copyright 2019. Also, tune in to Robert Brus's podcast, The Go All In Podcast Movement, and check out his website at www.goallin.com.au. Go to mitchellchadrow.com/show080. People can get the podcast. You could go to Overcast, mitchellchadrow.com/Overcast. You can go to iTunes at mitchellchadrow.com/iTunes. Subscribe there. Leave us a review. It really does help other people find the show. And, of course, we're on Spotify. Go to mitchellchadrow.com/Spotify or anywhere that you can get your podcast. Tune in next time for the Mitchell Chadrow Show with more stories of amazing business people, entrepreneurs, and startups whose stories provide real value, guidance, and help, and entertainment for our Listen Up audience. I'm Mitchell Chadrow. Until next time, my trusted friends.